Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Velero community meeting. Today is November 9th, 2021. And per usual, we got some status updates and discussion topics, and then some fantastic contributor shoutouts. So let's get started with status updates. First up, we have Daniel.
Can I have another 10 seconds because I'm still editing my status?
Absolutely. We'll go with Dave for now.
Sure. So let's see, I've been working on addressing reviews on the item snapshotter PR. So thanks everybody for those, Daniel, Bridget, and Jade Lick. I'm not sure the first name there. So definitely appreciated. Spent a fair amount of time last week working with the CAPI folks for Cluster API and looking at backup and restore issues there. And so that's something that essentially there's some issues right now with rolling back a cluster. So if we have a CAPI cluster that's managing other clusters and we take a backup, then we do some changes and some infrastructure gets changed, and then we try to restore back to the old state. That's not working real well at the moment. So we're working on figuring out what the right strategies for that are going to be. And hopefully we'll come up with something. And then I'm also working on the Astrolabe Demo stuff, and we're doing working on like gRPC plugins in Astrolabe. So lots of fun. That's it for me.
Can you tell me a bit more about the Astrolabe demo that you're working on?
We're trying to get to the point where we have like a bunch of different things that work through Astrolabe. So right now we can do volume snapshots. There was a demo where we could move a disk from AWS to vSphere using the Astrolabe APIs. And we're working on a Postgres POC that'll take like the Zalando operator, and it'll snapshot the database using Postgres backup rather than snapping the disks. And we're just about finished up with the restore part of that. And what else? Bridget's working on like CRD-based APIs. I'm working on a plugin mechanism so that we can have things come and go inside of the Astrolabe framework itself rather than linking them all together. And once we have so we'll have some of those pieces working, we'll be able to demo the pieces individually. And then with the item snapshotter, we should be able to link those into Velero, and we can then do like a Velero backup and have it back up the Postgres database via a Postgres snapshot rather than a volume snapshot. So that's kind of what we're driving towards.
Awesome. Do we have those recorded anywhere, or are they just code snippets, or?
It's code at the moment. We haven't gotten to the point of actually running so that we can do the demo.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have timeline? I'm just curious because I would love to.
We should be able to do some things like I think we can probably show some things in another couple of weeks with like the Postgres and the Copia repository.
Oh, nice.
And we can start putting some of that together.
Should we see if we can schedule that for the first week of December or something like that?
Yeah, we can just put that in the community meeting and do a quick demo of where things are at. I still need to put together like the whole, like here's the whole big shebang of everything, but just a quick demo would probably be fun.
That would be awesome. Cool.
Yeah, so maybe we'll put that on for the first week of December. I think we can.
Great. All right. Any other questions, comments for Dave? All right, Daniel, do you want to jump in?
Yeah. Recently, I've been working on the CSI support for AWS driver or Velero AWS plugin. When I'm working on this, I see an issue regarding a piece of code that was committed a few years ago. Shall I discuss it right now or wait till the discussion topic section?
Let's add it to the discussion topics, I think.
Okay. So the issue is that Velero collects the availability zone via the label, but it cannot. This doesn't work for PV provisioned by CSI. I'm going to discuss it later. And another issue is the pre and post hook issue of 4268. A developer from Red Hat pointed out that the PV snapshot is not reliably triggered between pre and post hooks. Actually, when I'm investigating this issue, I see some additional issues. Currently, I'm still doing some investigation. It's really weird that even for one pod and one PV, if I write some file in the pre-backup hook, the new file was not backed up in the snapshot. Currently, I'm not sure why. I discussed with Scott, and he also did not know why. So I'm still doing some investigation on that. Yep.
So code-wise, Scott was like, "Oh, I think this is like an architectural problem." I haven't actually looked at the code myself. Do you think that the code should work, or that
I think the
the
code
approach you're
should
taking is just
work.
broken? Okay.
Yeah, I think the code should work, but it didn't work as expected in my test. Maybe I did something wrong when I'm testing it, so I need to double check.
Okay, so it looks like we're doing like the PVC snapshots and RESTIC backups between the hooks.
Right.
But we're just not, okay. So so we're much closer to like, this may be a bug rather than, oh no, we really did it wrong.
Mhm.
Okay, that's good. That's really good to hear.
Yeah, I think that's all.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Any other questions, comments for Daniel? Right, Bridget.
Hi everyone. So last week I had a sync meeting with Fong to talk about the plugin versioning and the work that he's been doing on that so far, which is really great to see. I've been experimenting with the branch a little bit because I was trying to see if we could pull out the part that just is the code rearranging rather than like the next step, which is adding in all the context stuff. And while I was working on that, I realized that there might be some things missing from the design doc in terms of like where all the code should go. The plugin code is pretty complex, and there's lots to it. And I think there's a section that I think I've missed in rearranging stuff for the versioning. So I'm gonna try and figure that out, and then I'll update the design doc to encapsulate that or to put that information. So as Dave mentioned, yeah, we've been working on Astrolabe and I've been working on the CRD design, experimenting a little bit with like trying to add a controller into like the Astrolabe server, like the demo environment that we have, just to try and experiment with that and see what the best approach is going to be, but that's still very much work in progress. And then we had a bug report from like an internal team, and it was something that had been reported by the community, but then I think that like they solved their issue and closed the bug, and then we kind of lost track of it. But there was an issue with the CLI where if you set up an additional backup storage location, the credential field always gets set, even if you didn't try to specify a credential. So then that causes an issue later because it tries to retrieve a secret with a name that's empty. So so I've put in a fix for that, and I think I'd like to get that in for the 1.7.1 release if possible. I don't know where we're at with the timing for that, but that's what I've been working on.
Awesome, thank you. So this you submitted.
Oh yeah, sorry. I realized I put in the bug issue and not the PR link. Oh,
But
I think it's maybe been approved. So I think yeah, I think I need to go ahead and merge that. So
okay. So yeah, I guess I was wondering why it was still open.
Yes. pretty sure I got approvals from Genting and Scott today, so I'll get that merged.
Nice. Yep. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Bridget. Any questions, comments for Bridget? All right. Wenkai.
I'm working on the CSS board for Azure plugin and got the similar issue with the AWS plugin. I think we can talk more later. And the other item I'm working on is I'm trying to investigate the issue when backup and storing the node port service. To see the status for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Wenkai. Any questions, comments for Wenkai? All right, let's dive into the discussion topics. So Daniel, I saw you added yours on top here. We're gonna go with Frankie and Fong first. So Frankie.
Oh, all right. I think the best way to explain this particular issue that I'm working on is by clicking on the RFE option to delete and recreate objects. The use case we care about is very similar to this. I really think that I almost think that the issue that my team member Pradeep brought up, I think it's a duplicate. The only difference between these two issues is the solution. So here it says, yeah, I'll just read the user story. As a cluster operator, I want to use Arc, now called Velero, as a mechanism to keep two clusters in sync. This might be prod A and prod B, or alternatively, every night mirror production to staging so that we have a fresh environment for testing / staging. And that's exactly the use case we Tanzu Migrator team have. And currently with Velero, what you have to do is you can do backups on a schedule, but if you want to do a restore, you're gonna have to start from a fresh cluster, right? But we want to kind of save time. We want to keep up a kind of dormant cluster. That's exact. So this, and here they call it staging, but we're gonna call it our team. I'm gonna call it dormant. Actually, my team doesn't call it dormant. I call it dormant because that's what makes sense to me. My team calls it hydrated cluster. That doesn't make sense to me. But anyway, sorry, so many words.
Usually we have hot and cold.
Hot and cold. Okay, so does that mean the cold one is identical to the hot one?
Yes, and I think the difference is you have one that's not running, but it's a little different, because you're doing it by like scaling down
That's right.
The sets rather than simply turning things off.
Exactly, and it saves time because some of these clusters can be very big and it takes a lot of time to do a restore. So we want to save that time by doing the restore ahead of time. And then when a disaster does happen, we want to be able to bring the cold one up really quick, and it's as fast as scaling up. But in order to have that cluster prepared, we need to be constantly restoring, which means that we need to do what we call incremental restores, but that's also kind of a misnomer. But what you want to, it's like you take the difference from the backup. So you have this cluster that's supposedly update with your production cluster, and then you take a backup of your production cluster, and then you restore onto this cold cluster, which is, I'm sorry, I could pause for questions. Does anyone have questions regarding what I'm talking about? I know this is super confusing. I'm not.
No, I mean, the idea is that we could update resources, right? Rather than simply, so right now we either add new resources or we leave them alone.
Yes.
And that's kind of the philosophy that was taken early on.
Exactly.
And yeah, there's several different things that might play into this. So one would be updating resources in place. It gets ugly, for example, like PVs. So with file system backups, it might be possible to patch things, but we don't usually the difference is that usually things are live. So like if there's a volume that's live and it's actually in use and we change it, that will actually break a bunch of applications. Like say you have a Postgres database running and we just go and start overwriting its files, the database will most likely crash. It's not going to be happy. So that's one potential issue there. Block volumes are even worse. I mean, if we start slamming block volumes in without unmounting and remounting the volume, we will crash the worker nodes. We'll actually get a kernel crash.
Yikes.
So we have to be very careful about those kind of things. We can't just, update the blocks on disk.
What does Rustic do when it does incremental, like snapshot stuff? What I'm very unfamiliar with stateful apps.
I mean, backup versus restore are different things. So on backup, all you're doing is you're looking for changes and you're storing them away. On restore, when you have something that exists and you're trying to bring it in sync, it's something you can do on a, if something is unmounted or not in use, right? So like you have a file, like say you're using rsync, right? Let's take rsync as an example. Now, if you have two hosts and you've got applications running on host A and applications running on host B, and you rsync from A to B with the applications running, bad things will happen. You have like the cold cluster, like you're talking about, where B is not working, then you can do things like update via the file system and change files, and the applications aren't running, so they don't care, right? And as long as it looks good when they start, they're good. With block volumes, if we're working at the block level, the volumes have to be disconnected from the worker nodes before we make any changes at the block level, because the file system is an application. If you look at it that way, it's part of the kernel, and it's expecting things on disk to match what it thinks things are in memory. And when things get out of sync, it's like, this is really bad. Something, the disk has become corrupted. I'm just going to panic and crash. So there's that aspect to it that we've got to be mindful of. So like your case where you're saying, hey, we're going to shut down, for example, like the applications, we're going to scale them down to 0, then ideally the PVs would be detached at that point because there's no pods running. So we can do things like update the PVs, and we can update the Kubernetes resources. Still issues with things like running controllers. That's the update issue. And then the other issue is, say you delete something in your source cluster. When we restore, should we delete it from the destination cluster?
All right, there's no cleanup. It's not a true sync because you don't clean up anything that was deleted in the source cluster.
Yeah, so we'd have to add that. So it's probably something where we're better off looking at how we can share infrastructure and building like a sync application rather than a backup restore application. Because kind of my experience has been that people don't expect backup restore applications to like delete data or overwrite things for them. And when it does happen, they get really bent out of shape because they weren't expecting it to happen. Versus like if you're like I had this, even like a desktop backup, I built a desktop backup product, and one of the features in it was clone, which we defined as, we're going to make your destination disk look exactly the same as your source disk. And people would use this and they'd say, hey, why did you delete all the files in my destination disk? It's like, well, because you cloned it. You wanted it to look exactly the same. And why would you, what did you expect it to do? And they're like, well, I didn't expect it to delete all my files. And I wound up with like 5 layers of click through whenever you clone things. Like, really, this is going to delete stuff. So it's not an easy question is the problem. It's definitely something we can discuss, and we can look at, what the right place is, whether it's a backup restore, it's part of backup restore, if we're really looking more towards like, hey, let's make Kubernetes sync and go down that path.
In our backup storage, backup restore solution, we have all of that taken care of as a little bit higher layer than the Velero. So we only use Velero to restore the metadata. However, when you, in the case that you are talking about restore to the original namespace where the application is running and using the PVC, then we do exactly just what Dave just mentioned, that first we have to scale down the application so that nothing is running at all. That means that we even shut down the application pod, release it to 0 pod. So nothing is using that PVC anymore. Then we're going to restore the data to that PVC. That's the only way we can guarantee that there is no conflict between 2 pods in using the same PVC at the same time. And they like Dave say, there might be some wrong image about the wrong idea about what the content of the data in the PVC is currently. So by shutting down the application completely, we guarantee that. But the problem is that is not like a in-place restore. Right? You have to shut it down, and that may interrupt the customer usage. And probably that might not be an ideal restore scenario compared to restore everything to a new namespace, then just shift over to that namespace. That's just my opinion, but it depends on the customer use.
I was thinking, not to address all the problems with the solution to this issue, all the problems, meaning having to scale down all the pods to 0, and okay, that's probably the biggest issue. Maybe we are introducing hooks as a team. We have the pre-backup, post-restore hooks that we're introducing. We're expecting that if you want to use this flag, maybe a force restore flag, you're going to have to know the implications of using it. No, you don't even want an option for force. You don't want people
Not if it doesn't work. Not if it doesn't work. I mean, if you say, hey, you can use this, but you have to do all these special things before you use it.
Like make your own plugins that do the quiescing and unquiescing.
They're going to do it without doing that, and then it's going to crash their systems, and they're going to be really mad.
But but they could use this Velero normally without force. Could we say, force is dangerous. You got to know what you're doing if you're going to use this flag. No.
It's just these are the kind of things. It's like when you give people these hooks to cut their fingers off, they will use them, and then they'll cut their fingers off, and then they'll be really upset. And it's really hard to explain what should be happening here. I think it's something we can think about, but it's not going to be an easy fix.
Yeah, definitely seems like a lot to think about.
Yeah, and even things like resources, like what parts of the Kubernetes resource do we override and update? So, I think right now we typically don't back up status, but if we're rolling back, or if there's a resource that we're updating, are we only going to update the right fields?
Yeah, I was thinking of just staying consistent with what Velero does now. What Velero does now when it compares resources is it strips the metadata that's not useful. I can't remember what those fields are, but it strips those away to compare to objects. If they're different, then it throws a warning. But I was thinking instead of a warning, just go ahead and update the resource.
Yeah. See, the thing is, who owned the resource and who updated it before, and what state do they expect it to be in? So if it's a top level,
they expect it to be in the same state as the backup file. What's in the backup file?
Well, no, because there's multiple layers now, right? So maybe have an operator that relies on another operator. So say, for example, we have the Harbor operator working with the Postgres operator. And on side A, we updated the Harbor thing, which then updated the Postgres thing. Okay, good. So these are all reconciled properly. Now we do backup restore. And if we, for example, like change the Postgres resource before we update the Harbor resource, is it, what's the reconciliation going to look like? When we do change the Harbor resource, that's like a change. And will Harbor be able to reconcile that properly? I don't know. It's just hypothetical, right?
It's kind of
But I
like
think,
it's like going back to the requirement that you need to, as a user, quiesce everything. You need to shut down your apps before you do something like this update. That's how that problem will be solved.
yeah, but we don't really have good ways to do that, right?
Right. Yeah. And we expect the users of currently to create their own plugins, which is a lot of work, as we're finding out.
Yeah, it is a lot of work. And even things like scale down, that pretty much only works if you actually have a set, right? So if I just went ahead and made a pod by hand, there's no real way to scale that down, is there? You'd have to delete the pod and then recreate the pod.
Right. Yeah. You'd have to have some sort of replica set or deployment.
Yeah, but if you didn't do that, which I've done.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I've created pods before.
Yeah. So anyway, so it's worthwhile taking as kind of a longer term investigation, I think.
Mhm.
But I don't think there's an easy answer.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, cool. I'll keep thinking about it with my team, and then we can discuss it more outside this meeting. And
Yeah, maybe we can start like an epic or something, because I think it's worthwhile to think about. I mean, certainly the sync case is pretty cool. And whether or not that's a Velero thing or whether we share infrastructure to have a separate sync utility. But I think we need to at least work through the issues that we can see before we start going too far down that path.
that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for letting me have the time to discuss this.
Yeah, I think it's a good topic, and it's something we really need to look at. People ask for it, but it's like, do you know what you're asking for?
Right. And it seems so easy, right? It's like, oh, come on, just update the resource. But there's so much more to it than that.
Yeah, it's a little trickier, unfortunately. Maybe there's just a different approach we could take. I mean, if we really could get to the point where we could freeze everything and roll it back, and even that, like reverting, is a common case of like revert to a previous snapshot of a disk, and it's like, well, but that means you have to make sure it's unmounted before you do that, otherwise you'll crash the systems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are definitely interesting things and important things to think about.
So what are the next steps here?
I'll talk about the issues that Dave and Fong brought up today, and see if they have any ideas around it, and then go back and forth with Dave with these ideas.
Yeah, and when Eleanor's back, which should be next week, why don't we start making this as like an epic that we'll just have like an investigation, figure out what a good solution for, say, doing either incrementals or, let's like start listing out what the actual use cases are. Because I think there's one use case, which is, hey, we want to keep 2 clusters in sync, which is a little different than backup and restore.
Right.
And then there's things like, I want to roll my cluster back to a known state. Is that feasible or sensible? Because one is like, we're moving forward, right? We're syncing, we're bringing B up to date with A. And then there's the like, we're going to roll backwards. We're actually going to take us back in time and update everything so it's what it was before.
Right. So go to different states.
Yeah, at least that's 2 use cases I can think of that are quote unquote incremental.
Awesome. Thank you both.
Thank you.
All right, next up we got Fong.
Yeah, it's more like not an issue, but I actually want to get any update that the Velero team has on the vulnerability issue. Last time I think we talked about that we are thinking about doing it in the Velero 1.7.1, but I just want to get any updates from that if you guys have it.
Alonka, you want to update?
Yeah. Yeah, we have merged the fix into the membranes, and the PR for the Windows 7 is submitted and waiting for review. And I think we can merge it this week.
Oh, okay. So, do you expect the what is the ETA for the release 1.7.1 with this fix? Is that
I
gonna
think
be?
it's end of November.
Yeah, current plan is around the end of November. And I want to point out, as for the CVE fix, I think there's one CVE with a relatively high score in the glibc in distroless. That one, we really depend on David team to fix it. We need to double check before we release 1.7.1. But if there is no fix, the CVE will still be there.
Okay, thank you. I just want to get the update so we can pack in our we can test it before we release to our product. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Next up, we got Daniel.
Yeah. Can I share my screen?
Absolutely. There you go. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this is regarding how Velero collects the availability zone info when it's taking a snapshot of a PV. So currently, the way Velero works is when it takes a snapshot of a PV, it will try to get the availability zone from the label of the PV. They read it here, and later this information will be dumped into the snapshot spec here. And when after Velero calls the API of cloud provider to do the snapshot, and when it's doing the restore, it will get the PV info from the snapshot spec and pass it to the volume snapshotter plugin. There is a parameter. Here in volume snapshotter, in the create volume from snapshot function, create volume request, it will require the volume availability zone, especially for AWS, because you want to create EBS volume, the availability zone is a required parameter. But unfortunately, when I'm doing tests for my code in the CSI support work, I found that the PV that is provisioned by the CSI driver. Let's give it a few seconds. It has the empty labels. So that will cause them, let me try. That will cause the snapshot spec looks like this. It doesn't have volume availability zone. And then there's an empty string will be passed to the AWS plugin to create the volume, and will fail. So current code doesn't work for current way to gather the availability zone information doesn't work for CSI PVs. So did I make myself clear about the problem we see?
Yeah, so Do you think this is going to be somewhat standard across all the CSI drivers? Is it like this label is not AWS specific or, Azure specific?
The label is not AWS specific, but currently I'm thinking the solution is to add a backup item action to modify the PV spec to read this node affinity information and add the labels so that when this chunk of code is triggered, the label is present and things can move on, because different cloud provider may have different requirement for availability zone. For example, for some cloud provider, maybe it's okay, you don't have this information and the PV will still work. And they may have different ways to get the availability zone information if it's needed.
Yeah.
I also asked Nolan why this decision was made, and he's also not sure because this was committed before he joined the team. I also tried to reach out to the author of the particular commit, but no response. So I think maybe we should move on with what we think is right.
Yeah, I think that's all we can do at this point. I mean, most likely it's there because it works.
Yeah, before, I mean, if we check the PV for at least provisioned by the entry driver, like this one. Yeah, it has such labels. That's why the code works for the PV by entry driver.
Yeah, and those labels are actually on the PVC. Or no, that's the entry driver, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's on the PV.
So
Yeah, you can certainly add the backup item action. My question would be, do we need to add, would it be something we can just put into the core code?
Yeah,
as well?
to put in
That
the
might be
core
easier.
code. Yeah, the issue is that, like I mentioned, it may only require for AWS plugin. And we also need to look for AWS or cloud provider specific key in the node affinity requirement. I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do if we put it in the a core code. I have written some code to update the AWS plugin to add this backup item action. It just read the information from the node affinity requirement and attach it to the label. And in my test, things work. The only please go ahead.
Is this checking? So one thing that's kind of weird is when we run the vSphere plugin, we actually install the AWS plugin. And so this backup item action would get installed, right?
Yeah, but it will check for the specific key, which is
okay. Okay, so as long as it's not going to interfere with it,
yeah, I think it will
that seems fairly safe. So we'd want to make sure that we test this with the vSphere plugin, for example, that the two plugins don't fight with each other.
Of course. I will also sync with Wenkai offline because yeah, maybe there's a duplication of code like this in Azure, but we're not sure how to share code across plugins. Maybe there may be some duplicated code
right
across AWS and Azure. And
yeah, no, eventually we would want to like merge this into the PVC CSI stuff. But so I wouldn't worry too much about how clean this code is as long as it works.
Another impact for this approach I want to discuss with you guys is that I hope you can see my screen. I'm typing here. When I try to restore the snapshot after updating the AWS plugin, the restored PV has this additional labels because it's edited by the backup item action in the AWS plugin. So that's something different, but I think that's acceptable. I don't think of any issue for this label.
Right. You can also write a restore item action that removes those.
Yeah, but I don't think that's really necessary. And that would be tricky because we're not sure if it's added by the backup item action or added by the CSI driver. If in another version it decides to move it to the label. That would be tricky.
Yeah. Well, when people complain, I'll point them at you.
Yeah, sure. So I think that's the issue and the solution. If I'll sync with Wenkai offline, and if things look good, I will submit the PR to fix it this way.
Okay.
Any comments? Okay, I think then I'll move forward. That's the plan. Yeah, Jonas.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. Does anyone have any other discussion topics for today?
Let's see. Did Scott come by today? No, Scott's not here.
No.
I had some stuff I'd ask him. So
Yeah, Jen Ting isn't here either. All right, then let's do some contributor shoutouts. Bridget, you want to help out?
Yes, I can do that. So this was a change from Frankie, who's on the call here. So thank you very much, Frankie, for adding this. So this was, I believe, an issue where I think Velero used to support having wildcards in the exclude, and then there were some changes that went in.
Yeah, basically I broke it by adding validation.
Well, I didn't realize, I reviewed that code. I didn't even realize that we supported wildcards in the exclude. So thank you very much for spotting that and fixing it.
Ah, thanks. I'm glad to get double credit for this because I already got credit for this for the original PR, and now I got cherry picked into the 1.71. So woohoo. I'll take all the shout outs I can get.
You deserve them. Thanks for your contributions.
No problem.
This is from Ali Patel. So I didn't review this one, but it looked like there was an issue in the pager function that we're using for listing things from whenever we're doing fetches from the Kubernetes API. I'm not sure what the issue was here. This is where I find that I can't read under pressure, and I tried to read the PR descriptions. Yeah, so this was sorry, I can't read that and parse that under pressure, but thank you, Ellie, for fixing the bug in the pager function that we're using for the Kubernetes API. So thank you very much. Yeah, so I think this is a similar change to the one that
Yeah, I think this is the one that got fixed.
Yeah, so and then the other one was the merge into the branch. Okay, and thank you. And then this is a fix in the Helm charts from Kahiro-kun, who so I think that this was updating the sample in the Helm chart to also show how to enable the CSI plugin. So there's a flag that needs to be set, and then also showing how to add the init container as well for the CSI plugin. So if that's what you want to use, that's hopefully more easy. It's easier now to enable. So thank you very much for that.
Awesome. Yeah, that is it for contributor shoutouts this week. Thank you as always, Bridget, for being my helper here. And thank you to everyone who has contributed to the project. Thank you everyone on the call, and have a fantastic rest of the week. See you all next week. Bye, folks.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. See ya.
Thanks. Bye.